So good day and welcome, Kellea and Ana Maria. It's nice of you to join us on TPA Full Disclosure series. Can you please introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, hello, Busayomi. It's nice to meet you. Nice to be here today. My name is Ana Maria Enríquez. I am actually zooming in from Colombia, where I live in Medellin. I'm from Colombia originally, and I am the executive director of the Human Rights Funders Network since March of last year.
Right.
Hi, I'm Kellea Miller. I'm the Deputy Director of Human Rights Funders Network, HRFN, and I'm based in California in the US.
Great. Well, you're welcome, Kellea and Ana Maria. So Ana Maria, you have spent about 20 years in courses relating to transparency, participation, and accountability issues, especially on gender equality and human rights. So what's the motivation for working on these issues, and what are the highlights of your experience over the years?
Yeah, the motivations and is very sort of akin to the current situation I am in, having lived 30 years outside of my home country, but always very, very committed to human rights. That's the both professionally and personally, as a matter of having lived in a country that has gone through the one of the largest wars in the region, and attempting to achieve a peace agreement that is, I think, very fragile, but a lot of lessons learned there. And so this personal inspiration has been showing up in different jobs in my life. I have been an intersectoral feminist, always working within the human rights field in, NGOs, United Nations, private foundations, and I have seen a particular need to work, yes, with money, with philanthropy, in order to make sure that more and better funding and caring funding and flexible funding reaches the people that really need. In this case, I have no doubt that is the human rights activists and human rights defenders from around the world.
Oh, great. Kelly, how about you? What was the motivation for you working around transparency and participation issue? What has it been like for you?
Yeah, so I started working in this field as an intern 20 something years ago and realized that there was a lot of power and money, and also a lot of people who wanted to really bridge and break down the barriers and create access for the people who are doing the work. And I learned and was raised within a feminist philanthropic field, which starts with the idea that we need to shift not just money, but also power. And central to that is working around transparency and making sure that how decisions are made are not just described after the fact, but that they're made in collaboration, that movements get to shape how money is moved, and that the priorities are driven not by people sitting in, well, it used to be small offices, now everyone's working from home, but not working in places that are isolated, but really embedded in the movements themselves. So for me, watching the complete shift in how movements can resource themselves and when they define their resourcing, and how that compares to top-down funding is one of the things that brought me to the table. And I have to admit that the thing that motivates me the most are the personal relationships, the work with friends who are activists and funders, friends who, when we get together, we are able to dream about a world that is possible. And then we separate out into our own parts of this ecosystem and try to make it happen collectively.
Great. Also, it's like you preempt my next question to you, which has to do with collaboration, really. So, collaborations by donor in the philanthropic sector, and I think in the non-profit sector in general, has been gaining traction globally. So what does it take to develop a well-functioning and effective funding collaboration like Human Rights Funders Network? And why is such collaboration essential to meeting today's development challenges? you want to go first, Kellea?
Sure. I think first we have to understand that people have talked about collaboration for a long time, but that at the end, they often get back into their own institutions. And the basis of philanthropy is accumulated wealth that individuals make decisions around. And to break down that history is incredibly hard. So the very first thing is people being willing to let go of a little bit of that concentrated power and open up to new ways of thinking and new systems. Even getting funders to share ideas around their priorities, around who they're funding, used to be incredibly challenging. But the second thing for me about collaboration is not that funder groups need to collaborate with each other only, but that collaboration absolutely has to cross sectors, that movements should be involved in those collaborations, and that what I've seen as the most effective forms of collaboration are when they're done hand in hand between groups of funders who understand that coming together reduces the burden on the groups they're trying to fund. So for instance, a racial justice collaborative that was started a number of years ago with, for instance, Estrella Foundation in the mix, meant that movements who were trying to get funding from all of these different places suddenly could spend less of their time writing the same reports and more of their time doing the work. And so coming from an understanding of the political value is essential, and letting go of some of the traditional ways that we've done work is also essential.
Great, thank you, Kellea. Ana Maria, do you have an addition to it? What are the challenges, especially working in human rights sector like you, Hannah?
Yes, and well, I would only say from what Kellea say that let me introduce you to therefore. This is why since last year HRFN has thinking very, very hard about this open philanthropy concept. And so let me get a little bit into that, because it's not the sort of technocratic idea of what that could mean, but really it stems from reflections about what would it take for one of the most traditional fields of all fields, such as philanthropy, and particularly a very US-centric and northern field that stems out of a capitalist system and that is inherently immersed with notions of power that are counter to the feminist and human rights values and approach that that we embrace and that we wish all philanthropy was immersed or was practicing or was believing. Like a philanthropy in our dreams should be human rights philanthropy. There shouldn't be a division. And so we are approaching this concept and have done a lot of thinking. And some of the positive aspects of the pandemic is that it forced us to be thinking about this. What would it take in terms of innovation and out of the box thinking to promote a concept that is inherently participatory and open, and therefore is very scary, because as Kellea says, it involves accountability, participation, openness, transparency, be willing to let go of the power, and by all means be creative and flexible and more generous with the money in asking this from a field that is so traditional. So that's where we're at. By all means, we don't have it all ready, but await for this year or on the launching of sort of the practicalities of what we mean. But the road and the process really is reflected in the programs that we've been innovating and launching. For example, the Principles Project, which in and of itself is a collaboration with several networks, including Ariadne and Power Network. So this idea of putting the values at the core of what grant making means. So that's one, and having practitioners think it through in a very participatory way. But then we have the Lit Talks, which are open programs that are involving civil society leaders with an intersectoral and intersectional perspective, not the usual suspects. And we have a series of 8 throughout the year, and really centering philanthropy into, and I apologize, I'm gonna close the, is lacking a little bit, centering philanthropy into this critical thinking about what is next, what will the even the administration of the United States, the new administration, what does it mean, what is the impact in the world, how can we advance human rights in general more solidly and more assertively, but how can we move the philanthropic equation towards the philanthropy, towards in philanthropy, to give more and better. So that is what I would complement.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm curious, the question is to both of you. So what are these urgent issues that are emanating around human rights right now? And how is Human Rights Founder Network Secretariat influencing member decision to fund these courses as part of the ecosystem of human rights philanthropy? Do you want to go first, Kellea?
Do you mind repeating your question once again? I got interrupted. It got interrupted. It's delayed a little bit.
Okay, yeah, it's fine. So my question is, what are the urgent issues emanating around human rights courses globally? And how is Human Rights Founder Network Secretariat influencing members' decision to fund these courses as part of the ecosystem of human rights philanthropy?
Kellea, you want to say that? I mean, a little bit, I think I addressed that with the Principles Project, but there is so much more in terms of research and also past work from HRFN. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I think for us, the critical issues are always intersecting. And one of the things that we're doing at HRFN is trying to keep a pulse on the major issues of the day. So obviously, the huge impacts of COVID, including layered on top of other forms of inequality, racism, economic inequality, sexism and homophobia, and even the climate catastrophe that we're all facing. And for us, we are this broad network of members that focus on a range of issues. So what we do first is we try to elevate the different kinds of issues. So we make sure that people are able to be in dialogue around them. But we really are trying to bring people together in an intersectional way. And I think this word has gotten so much press. There's all this buzz around what it means to be intersectional. But at HRFN, because we have members working on all of these different issues, our added value is both bringing people together to see those interrelations and pushing people to actually put into practice working in intersectional ways. For us, this has taken a few shapes over the last year, especially since Ana Maria joined. And as she mentioned, she started in March, but if you cast your mind back, she started just several days before the pandemic was officially announced. So we've been operating in this very unusual context. But for us, what it means to be intersectional and global includes bridging movements and funders directly. As Ana Maria was talking about, our Lit Talk series is open to anyone. And the idea is to have people sitting with equal footing at a table, understanding what the context is and what those key issues are. It also means for us really pushing the envelope and asking why certain areas of work are not being done collaboratively. And then also bringing our own programming to the table. So we have our research that looks at different forms of funding, and we're coming out with a piece on intersectionality soon. And our Principles Project, which is really about how do we embody these practices on a smaller scale. And again, we are learning as we go. We became more intersectional through that process. We brought more global representation from civil society. And we even changed how we were doing it to try and learn and shift. And to bring some of these issues together, we offered closed captioning, French and Spanish. We tried to make our workshops visual, things to really bring the value of being intersectional and global into practice. So on the practical level up to the visioning level, that is at the center of our work.
Great. I'm not sure if some of what you said answer my question, but I'm kind of curious on how HRFN bridge funder grantee divide. You know, we have funders funding human rights work, and then also we have grantees who are working on the ground, perhaps in local communities. So how do you I mean, your organization, bridge the gap between funders and grantees to impact the work people do around human rights, especially when you compare grantees in the global south and philanthropists in the global north?
Yeah, so I'll start by answering a little bit on the on the how, but which might seem, you know, not as not as like amazing of an answer, but it really matters. And so I'll start enumerating the various ways in which we've approached that question. The first one is that when we say that we're intersectoral and um, global, we mean it by not just in our vision mission, but in our approach and in the how, internally striving to, no, and in the representation in our diversity. And I think that these steps lead to better dialogues and proximity to grassroots activism and to human rights activists. And so one way, for example, as Kellea said, is the the diversity of languages in which we are trying to approach, link, highlight, facilitate dialogues with activists and practitioners in the human rights field, and even, you know, artists, nurses, youth. Intersectionality really means that, you know, several sectors. And I think this is necessary because, as Kellea said at the beginning, there's been, in the tradition of being sitting at a desk and making decisions and even creating like strategies that are not informed. And so the second, that are not informed by the practitioners and the activists on the ground. So notice how even just by having a multilingual staff makes us a little closer to that goal, or puts us a little closer to that goal. A multilingual and regionally diverse, as well as ethnically and racial diverse board. That's second step. You know, the steering committee of HRFN is been adding and increasing representation from people in the global south, as well as not just private but public foundations, as well as civil society leaders. And so our most recent members include Alda Salomao from Tatzila Fund in Mozambique, and Selma Moreira from Baobab Racial Fund in Brazil. And this is to add to the diversity that we already have. For example, even within private foundations, we, you know, representative like Monica Leman from Ford Foundation, comes from Nicaragua and is an indigenous leader as well, with an indigenous trajectory in Latin America. And so that is the second part of the how, you know, a global staff that is diverse, more approachable, more closer to the field, and then having also a strategic dialogue. So we are opening the spaces, and by all means, this is not easy because there is issues of power relations. You know, also one would assume that the problem is solved by simply having activists and donors talk, and that's not the case. I mean, this is like weaving like bees, like weaving a different type of tapete, of tapestry together. And in doing so, I think one of the most important things I would say is the how approaching our own privileges, not just as funders, but as mestiza women, as white women, as, mixed women. And I think that the labor of conscientization uh, of how those dialogues will be conducted, of how to bring trajectories and weavings and intersectionality of who we know, for example, in the feminist movement, in the racial justice movement, and how to make sure that we don't lose perspective of avoiding it always to be US centric or Northern, without alienating those allies that for sure are in our network and that we expect them to take a bolder step. So here's where practicality comes into place. I've described a little bit of the how, the what is important to do the work, because it takes a weaving kind of bee-like work. And it's a lot of work, including just languages, right? So that's number one at HRFN. That's extremely different. You will see it. We don't have the website yet that we want, but you're seeing it slowly in how we are approaching things, and therefore it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But the second part of this that I would say is super important, aside from the how, it's the genuine conversations and the we call it like design thinking, sort of problem solving together in a fun way. So that, for example, the lead talks, you would expect, and the virtual meetings have provided that scenario. It's no longer unthinkable to think that only that we cannot have Gates talking to an indigenous woman or with me in the same Zoom paradigm. So we are inviting that type of confront of dialogue, and we're doing it. We began to do it last year more with the podcasts. Now, right now I don't promote them too much because they are only in Spanish. We haven't been able to translate them, and we need more staff to do that. But it was based on that. It was based on, like, how do we break the barriers of genuine speaking? How do we highlight not that which is always highlighted? How do we make it so it is not always English? How do we make it so that when we talk about the Middle East, we're approaching it in the in the correct language, and with the people that will really bring the advice philanthropy needs to do the work better in the region, for example, or to support it better. So I know my answers always go in circles and they are extensive, but I was hoping to convey the fact that the how matters as much as the what.
Great. Any addition?
I loved that answer. That was beautiful. The only thing that I would add is that part of what it takes to bridge funders and grantees, and especially global north and global south, is to redefine what we mean by resources. And there's the illusion, and I would say the fallacy, that there is only a trail of money from the global north to recipients in the global south. And that is completely untrue on every level. And first, on the economic scale, on the largest level, there's great research that talks about the continent of Africa being a net contributor to the world economy, because money is taken from the continent in the form of resources, illegally often, or through government collaboration with corporations, that they're, rather than thinking of the continent as a net debtor, it's a net contributor to the global economy in the scale of trillions of dollars over the last 30 years. So first, reimagining what it means to give and receive. So that's one piece of it on the economic level. Within the ecosystem of funding, also one of the things that I've worked on in the last few years is thinking about movements' contributions, and not quantifying it in dollars per se, but very much bringing that into the equation. The contributions of knowledge, of labor, and of money, not just through time, but of resources that activists bring to their own work, are foundational. Those movements would not exist without that autonomous resourcing. Absolutely. So when we think about groups receiving grants, they're already bringing so much to the table and contributing it back to the ecosystem. And then the last piece about re-envisioning resourcing to me is also that though there is a huge concentration of wealth in the global north, there is also indigenous philanthropy in every region of the world. And so you have in different scales and different forms, but there are many different forms of actual and technical grant making that are happening within communities, within countries, and within regions in the global south. So those would be my only additions to what Ana Maria had shared.
Great, thank you. You both speak wonderfully well, and I've really learned much about the way you approach grant making between the North and the South, global North and the global South. But now I want to ask a more personal question to both of you. So looking at your career, what has been the most favorite thing you love about what you do? And perhaps you have an advice on looking at it. What's your favorite thing about it? And what do you wish you knew when you started, maybe some 20 years or 30 years back?
And the question was, well, what has been the most, what? The most, and I missed the word.
Yeah,
Favorite.
I
Favorite.
I said,
Favorite?
yes,
Okay,
your favorite thing about your
favorite.
work, and what advice, what do you wish you know in the past before, like what do you wish you know maybe some 20 years back or 30 years back when you were just starting?
Ha, that's such a great question, Musaya. So I guess I would have to say the most favorite thing I've done. Definitely, I'm so grateful to the the upbringing that I have been privileged to receive from in particular from the women of Latin America, the feminist women, the intersectional feminist women of Latin America. I mean, I have to say that if I hadn't had that feminist upbringing, I wouldn't have dared to come to philanthropy or to step in places of, um, you know, that I wouldn't have dream of. For example, the UN, when actually Kellea and I are a dynamic duo because the two of us have worked together for a while. And I highly recommend that when you find the most perfect partner, you work with that partner again, because uh, I have to say that the way the lesson learned is have joy in whatever you do. Like for me, joy is a value. And through the things that I've enjoyed the most definitely are related to the intersections of, of racial and gender justice work, and the fact that we have pushed the envelope in many places, but when we have done it, we have had fun. That's very important, to keep joy of doing it.
Great. Kellea, what do you enjoy most and what do you wish you know in the past?
That's having joy for me also, it comes from knowing knowing that what we're doing is actually even in tiny ways shifting power. I've said this before, but my favorite part of my work is subversion. And I feel like working in philanthropy, you get to get into new spaces, and I consider it absolutely my responsibility and my joy to use that access to open the door for others who wouldn't have already had it. So being part of consultations where once you're in a certain organization, you might get invited, and you don't stop there. You make sure that the people who are doing the work are the ones who also accompany you and come into that space. So getting to see what it means long term when people start opening those doors for each other and breaking them down. I think that what I wish I had known was to be less afraid of getting into the money side of things, to really understand how money works. it is intimidating and it is intentionally hard to crack the code of how people access money, how financial systems work, how investments work. I mean, I don't want a career in that. Let me be very clear. I'm glad that's not totally the trajectory I've taken, but everything that we're doing to shift resources is embedded in this larger system. And for me, the fact that several $100 million go out in human rights grants every year, that's just 2% of the entire field of philanthropy. But even more than that, 1.5 or up to $2 trillion are held in philanthropy's assets, in investments. That is a part of the equation that we have to continue to push. And it takes knowledge, and it takes a knowledge that we often, those of us who find the most joy in dancing with our friends and being in the most beautiful forms of queer, feminist, racial justice, climate justice inspired activism. I mean, that's the joyful part of this work, is being in these spaces. We don't always also have the courage to step into a boardroom around investments or finances. And I think that's something that I'm trying to do now more and more.
Awesome. So have joy and be bold. I'm going to take one piece from both of you. Yeah. On that note, we round up this interview. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us and the lessons you have learned along the way. And I am sure that just as I have learned a thing or two, I'll still be watching after this recording. That people who are also watching will also learn a thing or two from what you are doing and how far you have come, and they'll be able to put those lessons into the work they do. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Busayom. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today and to learn more about what you do too, and to have fun in this interview.
Oh yeah, I did. Thank you.